What's the meaning of it all? One reaction, at least if I were not a Christian and I was coming to a talk like this, might be, oh no, another Christian who is going to tell me that without God, life is meaningless. How far from the truth. Human beings do find meaning in lots of things. Small things, a hug from a friend, a hike, a sunset, skiing, table games, a good cup of coffee. Of course, in bigger things as well. Academic success, a vocation that one enjoys, getting married, perhaps raising children who become responsible adults, hopefully. Helping those less fortunate. Having people say after you die, the world was a better place because of him or her. I think most of us would want to think that when I die, I want to have lived a life where people would say that Peter Payne, having lived here in this life, the world's a better place because of him. And I think that connects with the idea that we want our lives to be meaningful. We want our lives to be significant. We don't simply want to go through life and accumulate things. There was a bumper sticker that I saw once that said, the person with the most toys when he dies wins. Obviously, when you die, you don't take any toys with you. I remember one time, this was a sort of a joke, there are these two men who are at the funeral of a very wealthy man in town. And at the funeral, one whispers to the other, "How much you suppose the old man left behind?" And the other one whispers back, "All of it." You can't take anything with you. And when you think about what you want to try to accomplish in this life, you want to be able to say, I've really accomplished something significant. So when you think about what you're doing, what you want to accomplish, what are your aspirations? What do you really want to achieve? What's the meaning? What is significant? And that's what we're really, a topic we're looking at this evening. Obviously, not everything goes well. So when I said, here are some things you can find meaning, notice they were all good things. Small good things and big good things. But obviously, not everything goes well. When things don't go well, one can ask, what's the meaning of it all? If you're trying to pursue a career and you fail, I've known people who have been pursuing a PhD and it didn't work out, and they had to drop out of the program. So what's the meaning of it all? Oftentimes, terrible things happen, both personally and in the world. And when that happens, one can ask, what's the meaning of it all? However, I want to insert here that the meaning found in the Christian faith isn't just grasping for hope when all else seems hopeless. I have had many people say, Christianity is just a psychological crutch, something that you believe in because you can't make it very well on your own, and you need something else to hang on to. But if you had a better self-image, if you had a better view of yourself, you wouldn't have this need to hold on to God for meaning. And I think it is true that most people, when they come to faith in God in a time when they recognize they're not self-sufficient. Jesus once said that it's harder for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And I think what Jesus is saying is when everything is going smoothly for you, when you seem in control, our overwhelming tendency is not to trust God, but to trust ourselves. And what the Christian faith calls us to is not to trust ourselves, but to trust in God. But the benefit of trusting God is not just that God may get us out of a difficult situation, or if things aren't going well for me, that God may bail me out or help me out. I remember a story of a Christian was talking about his non-Christian neighbor. And the non-Christian neighbor was really a nice person, nice wife, nice kids. They enjoyed conversation with each other. The person had a good job. Things were going very well for him. At one point, the non-Christian said to the Christian neighbor, you know, there's one thing I do envy about you. And the Christian said, well, what's that? He said, well, sometimes I wish there were someone I could thank for the life I have. But of course, not believing in God, that doesn't make any sense. So he had an attitude of thankfulness, that he felt very thankful for the life that he had, for the blessings that he had. But from his perspective, if the physical world's all that's there, there's no one to thank. In fact, thankfulness isn't quite the right attitude. Lucky, perhaps, fortunate, but thankful is the attitude he felt like he wanted to express. But of course, not believing in God, there was no one to thank. Whereas the Christian could look at the things that were taking place in his own life and feel thankful. So the non-Christian was a bit envious that you have this bit of advantage and that you can actually be thankful to someone. It's also worth noting that there's a big difference between superficial happiness and deeper happiness. When people ask, what's the meaning of life? What do they want to try to achieve? I think a lot of people pursue things which will provide some superficial happiness but won't provide deeper happiness. Now, there are a couple of occasions when I was asked to speak in a business class in Croatia. And the business students in this class were students from pretty well-to-do families, and most of them had parents who were in business. And I asked them why they were pursuing business. And a couple of students were honest enough, well, there's good money in business. You can make lots of money in business, and that's what I want to do. And I said, probably those of you who are pursuing business think that by making lots of money, you're going to be happier. I mean, after all, if that's your aspiration, make lots of money, you think you'll be happier. But actually, psychological studies indicate that that won't make you happier. Particularly if the way in which you make money is not something which is for the benefit of society, but is basically for the benefit of yourself. And especially if you don't engage in particularly ethical business practices. I asked the group of students whether they thought that God will hold them responsible for being ethical in business when they die. So most Croatians are Catholic, so I thought it was a safe question to ask. When they get to heaven, do they think that God will hold them accountable for ethics in business, for being honest in business? And almost all said, oh, of course not. They said, will God hold you accountable for being ethical in your relationships with people you know closely? Oh, of course he'll hold you accountable for that. And I said, well, what's the difference? And one of the students said, well, the difference is this is Croatia, and God understands. You can't be ethical in business, and God knows that. Okay, but I said that the fact that you're pursuing business for making money, you're actually pursuing something that psychological studies will not make you happy. There was I think it comes down here, the happiness really is a satisfaction with how one lives your life. I think in a couple slides I'll have it here. But there have been studies on what is conducive to happiness and what produces happiness. And one study I was looking at three factors. One factor was pleasant experiences. And it's nice to have pleasant experiences. A good meal, a good night at a restaurant, a good movie, all those kinds of things are nice. But there are studies indicate that that really is the least important thing for happiness in the deeper sense of having a satisfaction with one's life. People can entertain themselves like crazy and still be very sad people. They said a much more important factor in happiness is doing something with your work and with your time that actually uses your skills and abilities in a good way. So it's challenging to you, but not too challenging. I mean, obviously you're doing good work, and in doing good work, other people praise you for that. And that actually gives quite a bit of satisfaction with oneself. If you think about asking, so why is it that so many men, and some women as well, are workaholics? They just work. Is it simply crazy? No. Actually, there's some satisfaction that comes from doing something and pouring yourself into something and making the business go, and people think you're great and you're wonderful. And there's a significant amount of satisfaction in that. However, they said the most important element in satisfaction with one's life and happiness in the deeper sense is believing that what you do is morally significant. That is significant not just for yourself, but for the community on a larger scale. So if you're doing things you believe are morally significant, you're much more apt to be happy. So I told these business students, psychological studies indicate that you're going in a direction which is counterproductive if you really want happiness in a deeper sense. If you really want happiness in a deeper sense, you're going to care about ethics, and you're going to care about other people, and you're going to want to be able to do things that when you look at it, you say, I was a moral person and I did the right thing. If you were around 2 days ago, there was a debate between Stefan Gustafsson and Christer. Christer is a humanist. And basically he said that we're called to treat other people with dignity, if people have equal worth and value. We're to consider other people's interests along with our own. We're not to privilege ourselves. And all those things are wonderful, but he doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe there's anything but the physical world. So where does that come from? He was honest enough to say that he doesn't know. It's a mystery. He just thinks it's true. Well, it seems to me if a person is honest and says the physical world is all that's there, then there really are no values out there. And I may choose to embrace the idea of valuing every single human being as being of worth. But it's not actually the case that every single human being is of equal worth. And if you look cross-culturally, it's not the case that most cultures embrace that ideal. That ideal actually comes from the Christian faith. It comes from the Judeo-Christian background within which everyone is created in the image of God. And if you ask, is there something about secular humanism or just a rational thought that would lead you to that conclusion? No, there's not. Biology doesn't tell you that. Biology tells you that you will care for people who are close to you. Kinship, relationships, evolution can favor that. But when it comes to people who are quite different than you, no, it doesn't favor that. But I think most of us really do want to believe that a secular Western ethic, which is basically the core of a Christian ethic, is the right thing. And we wish that other societies would believe this as well. But actually the belief that it's the right thing is something that's very difficult to support if you think that values are simply the things people value. Because how can I actually say that my conception of welfare is different from another conception of welfare where individual welfare is not nearly as important as the group welfare? We think individual welfare is very important, and that's rooted within the Judeo-Christian tradition, but that's not something true elsewhere. So if you want a meaningful life, one of the most important things in having a meaningful life is doing things that you believe are meaningful, that you believe are good for other people and not just the people who already agree with you. Yesterday I gave a talk on morality and ethics, and one of my basic contentions was that to have strong values, you need to have beliefs behind those values. It is true that society can instill values into people without having beliefs behind those, but if there aren't beliefs behind those, such as everyone ought to value other people, or people are genuinely of value, if you don't have those kinds of beliefs behind them, then those values are vulnerable to when pressures come. So for instance, I remember after a number of years ago, the economic collapse was beginning, and Enron was a financial institution, and the leadership of Enron were not telling the truth about their finances. And before the whole business collapsed, they sold all their shares. The business collapsed, and everybody who was working for the company lost everything they had. And I was listening to a program on National Public Radio, and the person that they were interviewing was saying, we shouldn't blame the leadership of Enron. What? You shouldn't blame the leadership of Enron? He said, no, we shouldn't blame the leadership of Enron. After all, they're just human. The temptations were too great. After all, when you're faced with these opportunities, who could refrain? Now, it is true that people won't do what they did at the end at the beginning. They would have small things where if we do this, nobody will notice, and I'll benefit. It's a wealthy company. Small little things lead to more things, lead to more things, lead to more things. And when you find people doing really horrendous things when it comes to, say, stealing other people's money or embezzling from the company, it's led up to that. But how did it lead up to that? Because there wasn't a conviction at the beginning that no, it's absolutely wrong to do it. And you need that to be able to not succumb to the temptations to compromise your values. So one of the importances, I think, of considering the Christian faith is how can I give a grounding to the values that I want to have, that I want to hold on to. A person might say that there's just a moral dimension to the world. I don't think that's Christopher's position. I think he just says there is these moral right and wrong. But it seems to me if it's not in biology, and it's not in biology, then surely he has to believe there's some sort of moral fabric to the universe, and hence he believes the physical world is not all that's there. That, I think, is a pretty religious position. One, however, can take a position which says, no, there's something behind the universe that values actually are rooted in God. So let me skip here a couple of slides. Does one need God for ethics? I've gone through some things here. Let me just go to, there was in June 22nd, 2012, I was going surfing the internet. Or my wife actually was, and she just said, here's something that looks interesting. And it said, prominent atheist blogger converts to Catholicism. And her name was Leia Libresco. So I looked it up, and she was a blogger for a prominent atheist website. So she was well known within the atheist community. And her very last blog on this atheist website was to say, I'm no longer an atheist, I've converted. And she writes on her final blog, I believed that the moral law wasn't just a Platonic truth, abstract and distant. It turns out I actually believed it was some kind of person, as well as truth. And there was one religion that seemed like the most promising way to reach back to that living truth, namely the Christian faith. So she became Catholic. So she announced to the world on her blog that she had become a Christian. In addition to the relationship between ethics and God, there's the question of what is a person. I actually gave a series of lectures in Finland just about 2 weeks ago on what is a person. Our sense of identity and value is deeply tied to believing that there really is an inner person. So there's the outer person, the physical me, but all of us have the sense there's the me, who is the inner person, the self that I'm aware of. And we have certain beliefs about this inner person. We believe that this self maintains identity over time despite changes. So I believe that I'm the same person that I was when I was 10 years old, even though I'm radically changed. That still was me. And I'm the same person that I will be a year from now, even though I will undergo changes. We believe that the self, or most people believe that the self has conscious feelings, thoughts, and experiences. Well, even if one says the brain exhibits conscious feelings, the self doesn't possess conscious feelings. What is that? Plus, within current science, there's really no way of being able to incorporate the idea of conscious feelings and experiences within it. In fact, there was a book that came out in 2012 by a prominent American atheist. And the title of the book was Mind and Cosmos, and the subtitle was Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinist Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. Part of the reason why they're convinced that atheism is true is they're convinced that naturalism is true, that there is nothing but the physical world. And his contention was that you can't view conscious states as simply being some sort of byproduct. You get the physical system working in the right kind of way, and maybe you get this conscious experience arising. There are a fair number of atheists who say there are no conscious experiences, it's just an illusion that we think there are. But others would say, no, there have to be conscious experiences. My feeling of pain is not the same thing as my behavior or what I may say. There really is an experience there. But if it's just something arises by neurons firing in a particular way, it doesn't appear as though it being conscious has any causal role. So neurons fire in a particular way, and the particular way they fire, I feel pain. But all the causal power has to be in the neurons and how the neurons are firing. So it seems as though the fact that I'm conscious of pain can't have any causal effect. For it to have causal effect, it has to have some substantial reality to it. And Thomas Nagel argues that when you look at all the higher organisms, they have sentience, from the simple organisms, reptiles, birds. Why is it, if we all have sentience and we all have some kind of experience of the world, why would that be if there's no survival value in it? Why would we experience pain if there's no survival value in it? Surely there must be some survival value, but if there's survival value, it has to have a causal role. And for it to have a causal role, it can't just simply be something that comes out of the machine, but it has no causal effect whatsoever. So his contention is that science, the naturalist's understanding of the world, is almost certainly false. I encourage you to look it up sometime. We believe that the self is the causal agent of thoughts and choices, not just the parts of my brain do certain things, but there's a common self that chooses what I'll have for lunch and works on a math problem. We believe that the self has at least some element of free will. Not everyone does, and a lot of materialists would deny that we have free will. And we believe that human selves are of great worth. None of those things fit with the naturalist paradigm. I mean, a couple of them you can try to get them to fit in, but it seems as though something really is missing. And there's something about the world that really is missing. Thomas Nagel doesn't want to believe in God. So you have theism over here, you have materialism over here, and he's looking for something in the middle. There has to be some reality to mind in the world. And what he argues for is there's something he calls natural teleology. There has to be something like mind within the world itself. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It actually makes at least as much sense, if not more sense to me. There's something like mind behind the world, which would cause a world within which sentience exists, and ultimately human beings like ourselves have feelings and experiences. Part of why I say this is that the reason for believing the Christian faith isn't just simply life will seem more meaningful if I have some undergirding for ethics, but actually it's quite reasonable to be a Christian. I'm a philosopher, and the point of this debate is not to give a rational defense of Christian theism, but I'm encouraged by the significant number of Christian philosophers who are really doing good philosophy. In fact, there was an article written recently by an atheist philosopher who was scolding other atheists for not taking this threat seriously enough. It says if your atheism was based on what you thought about 20 years ago in graduate school, you probably have a philosophically unjustified atheism. So you need to update your atheism. But when I think about it, when I think about the Christian faith myself and how much fun it is and how much joy there is in it, people think I have this notion that the Christian faith is just a bunch of rules or something you just simply do on Sunday. But in fact, the Christian faith is a relationship with God. When people ask me, why am I a Christian? Sometimes I'll respond by asking, which why question are you asking? Are you asking the philosophical why question? I love being the philosopher and I can play the philosophical why question. Are you asking the autobiographical question? The story of Peter Payne, how did I get to where I am? Are you asking the more experiential question of what does it mean to me today? What it means to me today is that I can go out and enjoy yesterday was a beautiful day and thank God for the world in which we live. When the things come up in the spring, it's not just that's biology, it is biology, but God has created an exquisitely ordered world. When I look at the mind that God's given us and the capacity we have to understand this world, I think, wow, how wonderful that we can begin to understand this wonderful world which God's created. There's lots of suffering within it. And I'm not giving a talk here on the problem of evil and suffering. Actually, Stefan gave a talk on that yesterday. If you want to ask me about that, I'd be glad to get into that. But for me, being a Christian is exciting, it's joyful, it's adventure. It's a little bit like if you like the Tolkien trilogy. Part of what's interesting about the Tolkien trilogy is that the Hobbit isn't just simply stumbling around in the world, but rather there is good and evil in the world. And things do make a difference. And the Hobbit is able to make a difference not only for himself, but for the whole of the world around us. I think likewise, we are in a world where we can make a difference, where our lives make a difference, and ultimately God will enter into this world and will straighten things out. I think at this point, if God were to enter the world and straighten things out, it would be the end of all evil, which would basically be the end of civilization as we know it, because there's evil in all of us. God hasn't done that yet, but nonetheless we can participate in what God is doing in this world, and it's wonderful to do so. It is true that being a Christian, one needs to repent of the self-centeredness which is in each one of us. And each one of us, I think, is pretty self-centered. And we need to recognize that we have turned our backs on God, and we need to be willing to trust Him. But in trusting Him, far from having a life that is drab and boring, it actually is quite, it's fun and exciting. And intellectually, it's also fun and exciting. So one of the things I enjoy about doing philosophy as a Christian, I don't feel like I'm in a straitjacket. I have to just believe certain things. I'm able to think freely about things, and I enjoy it, and life is fun and enjoyable and challenging. And I would just like other people to be able to see the Christian faith the way in which I see it. So let me stop there and ask for questions.
Yes. The the thing with the Christian faith, I'm wondering if you take into account all the theories about the multiverse, an intelligent maker, other explanations from other religions, and nirvana. If you take all these into account, what would you say would be the most convincing argument for just the Christian faith?
Yeah, I think the argument for the Christian faith is a composite of arguments. The strongest ones are the ones which actually turn to what I think God has done in history and turn on the person of Jesus Christ himself. I sometimes give a pair of lectures, one, the evidence for the resurrection, which is actually a much better case than most people realize. There was an atheist, Antony Flew, who actually debated a couple times on the resurrection of Jesus, but after thinking about it more, decided actually it's a much stronger case for the resurrection than he thought. But the second lecture I give is one I entitled, But Dead Men Don't Rise. So no matter how good your historical case may be, there's the philosophical question, and one needs to address those kinds of things. I'm actually giving a talk tomorrow on the Big Bang, the origin of the universe, and God. So if you want to try to make it to that, I'll get into that. My philosophy dissertation, PhD dissertation, was actually on that topic, looking at the apparent fine-tuning of the basic physical constants. And it's very popular these days, Stephen Hawking and others, to say, well, the solution, even though the world seems fine-tuned for the possibility of life, we live in a multiverse, where our Big Bang is only one of a vast number of Big Bangs, perhaps an infinite number of them, and all possibilities get actualized, and no matter how small the probability of any given universe being life-permitting, we obviously have to be in a universe like that. So if you come back to that, I could say some things about the multiverse and some problems with it. When I think about other religions, there are other things in other religions that I appreciate. There are a number of things about Buddhism that I appreciate quite a bit. If you want peace of mind, Buddhism actually is able to deliver pretty well with peace of mind. Part of the way in which they do that is to sort of separate themselves from the problems of the world, whereas the Christian faith says don't separate yourselves from the problems of the world. Immerse yourselves in those, get involved in those, and Jesus will give you some peace in that, but at the same time, the goal of the Christian faith is not peace. But that does come along the way, even when things are quite turbulent. So when you look at other religions, some of them I think simply don't make sense. And it just don't seem at all reasonable to me. And there are a few that seem to be coherent, rationally speaking. But for my look at the way, when I look at the world and I look at what makes most sense to me, they don't seem to me to match the real world as I know it, as well as the Christian faith does. In fact, within philosophical circles, it's rare to find a Buddhist who is a really good philosopher, who's able to engage in the sort of philosophical discussion that takes place in the West. But it's not hard to find a Jew or Christian who's a philosopher who engages in that kind of discussion. Yeah?
How do you feel, well, how do you feel about, since you're born in a Western country, how do you feel about that, since you're a Christian? In the sense that you can't speak to others from other religions, and saying that you can't really engage in a conversation with them. But Jewish, having been in Western civilization for quite some time.
Right, right. So Jews and Christians have a lot of dialogue, and they understand each other pretty well. Unfortunately, Christians have a terrible history of how they've treated the Jews. And I understand an awful lot of Jews who just have this very, very negative feeling towards Christianity and don't want to take seriously the claims that Christians make. Although there are a fair number of Jews, actually, who become Christians. And that's quite aggravating to a number of Jews to see Jews who convert to the Christian faith. I myself was born into a Christian family. I went through a time in high school when I was asking what I really believe and why. I'm thankful for that. But it's not the case that people only embrace the Christian faith because they were born into it. About 10 years ago, there were two books that came out in the same year, one published in the United States and one published by Oxford University Press in the UK, that were short autobiographical essays by prominent Christian philosophers. And the majority of these prominent Christian philosophers did not grow up in a Christian home. So they were people who decided they were Christians and are brilliant intellects, but who didn't grow up that way. So it's true that your background does have a big influence on you, but it's not a determining influence. Yeah.
They were from the Western society, weren't they?
All the people I read were from Europe or from the U.S. That may have been a selection of, but part of the difficulty is that Europe, and particularly Western Europe and the U.S., is very analytic. A lot of other parts of the world, like Latin America, aren't. I think the editors want to get people who are recognized by the Brits and the Americans as being prominent philosophers, and sort of have them be the centerpiece on the list of people they were looking at. But there are lots of people who are not Westerners. In fact, the church primarily now, there's far more Christians outside the West than within the West. There are far more Christians in Africa than Europe and the U.S. Well, maybe, there's a lot of Christians in the U.S., but I suspect there's more Christians in Africa than the Europe and U.S. combined. And there's a huge number of Christians in Korea and a quickly growing number of Christians, say, in China. Yeah?
Richard Dawkins, he thinks that that this meaningness of the Christian faith is not as good as your own meaning, that you can create your own meaning. What do you think about that?
Yeah, if you create your own meaning, then you can't believe that you're right and people who disagree with you are wrong. Right?
No.
Okay. You can say, I value this more than what they value. And I, in fact, will try, perhaps even forcibly, to get them to stop doing things I don't want them to do. So there are various practices that have taken place outside the West that Westerners have tried to stop, because the Westerners found those to be morally offensive. But if, in fact, you're inventing your own morality, then you can't believe that you're right. You simply say, these are the values that I like most. And if you have to recognize the reason why I value these is because my own upbringing or influences led me to value them, or even if you have some other reason for valuing those things, it's very important to have strong values that you actually believe that you're right. So, for instance, Bertrand Russell, who's a staunch atheist, had strong moral positions. He had strong moral opposition to the war in Vietnam. Okay? He believed that he was right, I think, rather than just he believed this is the value he embraced. But if you believe you're right, then you have to believe in something which is true regardless of whether or not people accept it. So you can have deep values, but if those values aren't backed up by beliefs, they're more precarious. To give an example, suppose you have a young man who grows up in a Christian family, and the Christian family has the value that you wait in having sex until you get married. And suppose that they successfully instill this value into the son, and he wants to wait until he gets married. And I'm going to be the kind of person who waits until he gets married. But suppose he no longer believes what the parents believe. But nonetheless, he has this value, and he likes this value, and there's actually good non-Christian reasons for saying why it's a good value to embrace. There's good practical reasons for having this the ability to wait. But now suppose this man now is a situation where this woman that he likes a lot is basically saying, let's have sex. All right? He no longer has the beliefs that says I should not do it, it's wrong to do it. He's decided this is how I want to be and I want to wait. But because he didn't have the beliefs that are behind it, that value, he goes with it. Likewise, a person doesn't believe that it's intrinsically wrong to be dishonest. It's just that's a value that I like. When they come to an opportunity where they can be dishonest and not to feel too bad about it, if they feel too bad about it, then you probably won't. But if it's something where you won't feel too bad about it, then without the beliefs, you easily succumb to that. And I think from a societal standpoint, it's important for people to have strong beliefs. In fact, there are some atheists who say the West ought to encourage Christianity. Because after all, Christians basically are supporting the beliefs that we think are really important. We disagree on some things, but the Christian faith supports the beliefs that we think are really important. And we want those beliefs to be well ingrained, and they're providing beliefs for at least the people who buy into that. So we want these beliefs to continue in the West. And they don't like the idea of get rid of the Christian faith, because after all, there are significant pressures that can cause what they value to be undercut. Yes?
But moral and meaning doesn't need to be the same thing, right? Or you use them in the same...
Yeah. when you ask what's meaningful for me, if I'm thinking about happiness, the happiness studies indicate that people who are happy are doing what they believe is right. Okay? It's not simply right culturally speaking. So it's not just I believe my culture embraces this, but this is what one ought to do. So for instance, in China, there is a high value in respecting and honoring older people. Okay? Now, they may say that this is sort of special to Chinese culture that we value this, but they wouldn't say it's perfectly fine for you not to honor older people. They would say, surely other cultures ought to do the same. If they were to do the same, it would be a much better culture outside of China than in China. So they believe that it's true for everybody. But it's the believing it's true for everybody that becomes difficult if you don't have some grounds within which you can say, I'm right and they're wrong, and simply this is what we believe, this is our way of doing it, even though it carries some weight, doesn't carry the kind of weight that one needs when there's significant pressures on those values. Janet?
I think maybe you missed her point.
Okay.
That you've been talking about ethics, but is it the same as meaning? What's the meaning of it all?
Is that the question?
It's more like...
What is the meaning of it all, right?
Yeah, my question was like, is it... So you mean, you talked about two different kinds of meaning, like more shallow, meaningful, or more deep?
Pleasant experiences are meaningful in a pretty superficial sense, and they make you feel good now, but it doesn't really make you feel good about your life.
So, like, the deep meaning, does it have to do with moral things? Or can you just live on, like, I like to eat pizza and stuff like that? Yeah,
I mean, with the example I gave of the neighbor who said, I wish I could thank someone. I mean, there's appreciation that a person who's a theist in the sciences can appreciate about science. Whereas the other person has this awe and wonder at science, but it's an awe and wonder simply of how cool it is that it works out the way it does. But for a person who believes God behind it, there's more sort of there's an awe within which one is a thankfulness that this world is designed the way in which it is. So meaning comes in ethical ways, but also comes in terms of being able to appreciate the things around you. So if I look at other people as being created in God's image, that really helps me to appreciate people, even if the person irritates me. Okay, remember, this person is created in God's image, God loves this person, and even though this person irritates me, I need to respect this person because this person is respected by God. Janet?
So what is meaning with a capital M? Why are we here?
Meaning with a capital N is what makes a difference in the long run. You're shaking. What kind of answer are you thinking of, Janet?
I'm saying, why are we here? That's kind of...
Okay, from a Christian standpoint, there's one thing I thought about doing was giving you sort of a thumbnail sketch of the gospel. Because after all, what's the meaning of things? When you ask, what's the problem that we face? I think our basic problem is that we have a broken relationship between ourselves and God. And that goes all the way back to the fall. And basically we're on our own trying to establish some identity for ourselves. And when people try to establish some identity for themselves, they typically either play God and want to exercise power over other people, or they make something else God, which isn't God himself. Maybe making money or fame, or if you're in the university, gaining high reputation and getting all these awards, and in the sciences, the supreme prize would be getting Nobel Prize here in Sweden. Okay, coming back here and having the banquet. Okay, so that would be what might be viewed as sort of the ultimate in success. But for Christians, when you look at what matters and why people have so much tension with one another, that kind of ego and arrogance actually doesn't help in relationships with other people. Some of the brightest people I know are very difficult to get along with, because they think they're so smart. They have no tolerance for people who aren't so smart. And relationships, why is it that marriage is so hard? I mean, after all, these are two people who initially really loved each other. Why is it that it's as difficult as it is? I mean, there are marriages that work out great, and that's my wife Janet there, and we love each other. But you find that there's self-centeredness, and you do things that are looking out for your own interest, and the other person recognizes that, and you, all right? So this conflict between ourselves is that basically we have the world revolving around us rather than revolving around God. And if we're God simply sort of saying, you're going to do what I want you to do, but God is a God who really cares about us. So Jesus talks about leadership as being a servant leader. The person who is a leader needs to be one who leads, and God is the one who is our leader. He's the one who leads us. And as we submit to Him, that puts our ego in its proper place. No longer up here, but down here, because God has created us. And it should help me to be able to relate to other people without coming across in arrogant ways, and be able to be understanding and respectful of others even when I disagree. And when Jesus says, love your enemies, that is something which I need. Now, the question is, how is it this broken relationship can be solved? And I think the ultimate need we have as human beings is to have that relationship restored. And to have that relationship restored is not simply a matter of through my trying harder, my pulling myself up by my bootstraps, or going into sort of a campaign to improve Peter Payne and make him a better person. Because there's still this self-centeredness within me. And no matter how I try, it's still there. And to be in a relationship with a God who not only is completely good, but also is completely opposed to everything which is evil, for me to have evil in my heart and come before a God like that is not good news. So the Bible talks about God as being a consuming fire. I mean, a fire that burns up what's there. And if anything evil comes in the presence of God, it cannot endure in the presence of God. In fact, I think the separation from God in the first place, going back to the story of Adam and Eve, was God's grace. That if that separation weren't there, we simply would have been destroyed in the presence of holy God. But what we need is to be restored in relationship with God, and that will bring restoration in our relationships with each other. Now, not everyone who's Christian does that. We're far, far from being perfect, but the gospel says that God actually made it possible to have restored relationship with Him through what Christ did on the cross. That in Christ's death on the cross, the death which is in us was taken into Him, and the life which is in Christ is given to us. And even though we're not perfect and pure and holy, Jesus is the only one that's perfect and pure and holy. And it's through our union, our identification with Jesus, that we can come before God and be viewed by God through Jesus and be viewed as holy by God. And we look forward to a time when we will actually have this intimate relationship with God, with what are you doing, what am I doing, and all the tensions that result between people. Now, the Christian gospel is very attractive, even apart from the spiritual side of it. And many people will say, I really like Christian ethics. But for Christian ethics to really work, we need to have God's help with us. We need God transforming our lives. One thing I discovered about myself is that as much as I'd like to change, significant change is very difficult. My wife will occasionally say, Peter, you keep doing this. And I'll say, I know, I want to change. But I'm not very good about it. By the way, if you ever get married, if you're not married already, don't expect your spouse to change significantly. Don't think, oh, there's difficulties in him or her, but we'll work it out and I'll help this person improve and become. They may change some, but don't expect huge changes. The big changes typically come when a person realizes, I can't manage. When they realize, I'm not sufficient in myself. And they turn before God and God say, help. Okay, in that helplessness, actually, they see the most significant change taking place, and we need God to work in our lives to change us and help us become more the people that God wants us to be. And of course, beyond that, there's life beyond this. So the meaning of being a Christian is both the meaningfulness of our relationship with God now, but also the ongoing connection that we have with relationship with God in the future. It's not just all pie in the sky by and by, but what it means right now is tremendously important. Yes?
Does God have to be connected to this long-term happiness, or can it be another answer?
Yeah, I mean, people could disagree, but I think basically people have a spiritual need to be connected more than just the people around them. And it's not only because people around you will sometimes let you down. Sometimes people you care most about will let you down. That we really have within us a desire to be connected in a broader sense. And a Buddhist is sort of being connected with all of reality, being one with the cosmos and all oneness. I think that's extreme, and it's getting rid of the personal when the personal needs to be there. But I think we're created by God really in needing to be in relationship with Him. And when we're not, what results is an identity crisis, and we try to solve that identity crisis in ways that makes our situation worse.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
there are tons of other gods. Why the Christian God?
Oh, yeah. If you, but when I say, well, why a Christian ethic rather than some other ethic? There are other ethics that don't have the same kind of value placed on individual human beings that the God of the Bible has. And I can't say that I can show that I'm right and they're wrong, and from that perspective. But I think there are good reasons to believe that God has acted in history. So in terms of, is it credible, not only in terms of I like it, I like what the Christian ethics looks like, and I like it more than say, what a Buddhist ethic would look like. I think there's good reason to believe that God has acted in history. And the core of that, as I mentioned earlier, is the resurrection of Jesus. But I also see it in various ways of things happening in people's lives, most of which are not so dramatic that a skeptic couldn't say, just coincidence. But at the same time, there are enough of those things that happen, and there's some quite dramatic things that I think are quite well attested, which I do think aren't accounted for by simply psychology or physics. But at the same time, my point is that I think there's good reasons for believing the Christian faith is true from a historical standpoint. Behind that are the philosophical questions, and hence, even with the resurrection, there's the evidence for the resurrection, but the more philosophical questions of what kind of universe do we live in, and does it make sense at all that there's something like mind behind the universe? Yes?
So, keeping faith in Christianity, does it mean that to believe that all of the religions are false?
No. I mean, it does mean believing that where they conflict or contradict something that the Christian faith affirms. Of course, logic demands, if it's not just simply a cultural thing, that if one thing is true, then the other...
Because one thing is totally contradictory with any other religion, that Jesus is divine. No other religion believes that.
Right.
Like, not more than any other human being. So that is total contradiction with any other religion existing on earth.
Well, actually, I have the frustration of a fair number of Hindus would say, well, there's lots of divines. I mean, there are lots of people who are divine. And Jesus was divine. But when we say he was uniquely divine, obviously that contradicts the other claims.
Yeah, so that means that all the religions doesn't work.
Well, what it means is that Jesus really was uniquely divine. I remember a conversation one time with a person who grew up in a Christian family, and the person believed that Christianity was just too narrow. I mean, there's other kind, caring, sincere, thoughtful, intelligent Buddhists, Hindus, etc. And he said, Christian is just too narrow in claiming to have the truth. You may have some gleaning of it, but to say you have the truth, here's the package, and anything doesn't fit with that package, you reject that. That's just too narrow. And I pointed out to him that what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, I want to be open to as much as possible. But if you're going to have a set of beliefs that conflict as little as possible with other things around you, your set of beliefs has to be very, very few, right? But if it's very, very few, then it's really not going to be significant in terms of actually a substantive faith that you have. So to have a substantive faith, it's going to have more beliefs in it than just this minimal few. And as a substantive faith, religions really do differ on substantial substantive issues. And I said to him, if you want to believe that God can be known, you ought to hope that God has revealed himself somewhere.
Peter, they need to talk about the...
Okay, I think we're probably at the end of our time. You can talk to me later. Go ahead.